the Bridge of Week is so much about an inability to just retreat from things, right? That, you might be tired, you might be burnt out, you might be sick of war, right? And there's work that needs to be done, right? And so sometimes, we cut off the parts of ourselves that want to be softer, want to be quieter, those kinds of things, because we feel like we have to take action, right?
Yeah, the hands that have become too shallow, too tough, they've become so because there is a need for them. Yeah. There are things that needs to be done in the world to create the conditions for there to be a space where one can retreat and one can, and so to be in the predicament of having experienced the contribution to well-being of inner work.
Yeah.
And then to be aware of the state of the world and how the limited availability of the tools for the inner work. It's a quandary. That's why we don't have. That's why the journey that we go on in these songs isn't simple. Yeah.
Well, and I think another thing about that is, like the final verse of that song.
Yeah.
Is about the consequences of that, right? So, when you recognize that you are exhausted and burnt out and you keep going anyway because you feel like you need to, what does that look like? And it's bleak, right? Or it can be.
Yeah, and then we get some of these, like the trauma responses. I hear a voice, it says run.
Yeah. I play deaf, I raise my gun.
Fight and flight are there. And I love that then it says, that then we're at I'm weak. Whereas before, there's this yearning to be weak and to be told the rest is all I need. We're aware of being strong or being that character, and desiring to experience the counterpart, the balance. Here, in really acknowledging like the trauma response, then being able to say I'm weak. That's such an interesting point to get to and to close that and to shift it from yearning to acknowledging I'm weak. And it's not like a happy ending, but we are experiencing vulnerability and embracing our imperfection there.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Tao Te Ching, right, says an excess of yang will surely lead to yin, right? And I think that's one of the stories of the pandemic for me, right, is that I'd been trying so hard to be active and social and, deeply, deeply engaged in struggle for my people and all of these things. And it all kind of came crashing down, right? And I realized that, the way that I had been doing things was completely unsustainable. And that I was going to change how my life worked on a day-to-day basis, or I was going to die. Which sounds melodramatic, but I promise that's where I was at. And, I think like I ran up against the limits of my own ability to shut down the quiet side of myself, right? To say, no, we're not doing that. We'll focus on that later, right? Right now, we have to deal with this police murder, right? Right now, we have to deal with the lack of transformative justice spaces in our community, right? Like right now, we have to worry about, giving young men opportunities to deprogram toxic masculinity in their social conditioning, right? I mean, just like so much, right? It always catches up, right? You can either live in balance or you can have that balance forced upon you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what happened with me. While I was working on these songs, and again, I think I was aware of the impossibility of continuing that imbalance while I was writing these songs. And while I was finishing them during the pandemic, I really became aware of just how right I was.
Yeah, absolutely. The story that this EP tells and the journeys that we go on is so nuanced and complex. Because we could imagine like arriving at this point of being intentional and disciplined and in alignment with one's values as like the end point, the happy end of a story. But given the state of the world and all of the actions that could be taken, then the sense of if one is self-responsible, there's this desire to live in alignment with one's values and commit to doing X and Y and Z. And then the complication of like being so intentional and being so committed, and then being aware that yes, and also I'm kind of driving myself towards death.
Yeah, I
that
think
being the starting point.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger and up until recently, and I'm sure I still do to some extent, but I had desperately bad main character syndrome, right? Like arrogance and a hero complex and a martyrdom complex, right?
Yeah.
Being like, and I mean, if this were a therapy session, I could talk to you for 3 hours about why this is and where it came from in my upbringing and me growing up, but you know, I for a long time thought that like, no, like if the world is gonna get better, I have to make it better. I have to force it into compliance with my values, right?
Because I see the problems.
I see the problems, I'm capable enough to put a dent in them. And so nothing else I do matters.
Right.
My selfhood does not matter. I am a means to an end. Because a lot of people don't have the opportunity or the privilege to be the means to the end of making the world a better place to live in.
Yeah.
It led to me hurting myself in some ways, right? In terms of being naive and expecting that I, as one individual person, could, you know, upend capitalism and police brutality and, you know, all of these systems that, you know, encompass billions of people, right?
Yes.
And I think it also had detrimental effects on my relationships and my, you know, stuff with outside people, right? I mean, when you start thinking of yourself as, you know, an archangel with a flaming sword, right? You know, it's very easy to look down on other people.
Absolutely.
And be like, well, you're not giving, you know, 110% of your capacity to the world at large. You know, what's wrong with you?
Right.
That you can see how messed up everything is and you're not, you know, giving your absolute everything to try to make it a better place.
Yeah, like I'm on the hero's journey. All of these
exactly,
people are nuts.
right?
Yeah.
And just like so arrogant and naive, and I think misunderstanding what the job of an individual is, right? Yeah, I mean, you know, delving into Taoism, you know, I think Taoism is like the, you know, the effective man acts without acting, right? And God, Taoism has these amazing just like riddles, you know, that are like, what does that mean? How do you act without acting?
Yeah, I love paradox.
Yeah, but I think one of the things about it is, you know, stop trying to assert your will on things, and learn how to move within the currents of what's already happening.
Right.
And you know, it's like you're whitewater rafting, right? And rather than, you know, you're not like, okay, do I decide to go upstream or do I decide to go downstream? Like, you are going downstream, you know, like there's no choice about it, right?
Yes.
And you could, you know, paddle for hours and hours and hours to try and go upstream, and you might make 50 feet of progress, right? But you're going to be
you could feel really heroic.
yeah, and you can feel really heroic because you fought the force, right? But in reality, you're just being kind of an idiot because like it makes a lot more sense to just raft in the direction that the river wants to go.
Right.
And you still got to dodge rocks, like you can't just like sit in a whitewater raft and let the river take you wherever it wants.
Yes.
That's an easy way to get killed, but like it's about working within the currents of how things are happening around.
Yes.
And I think ultimately one of the things I've realized in the last couple years is, the world's suffering is unending. And that's a very Buddhist value in some ways, right? Which,
absolutely.
I'm not a Buddhist, but I do think there are some really great lessons there and some a lot of overlap with Taoism too. And the world is full of suffering, and it's not looking like it's ending anytime soon, right? No matter how many pots and pans we bang outside our window during lockdown, or how many celebrities Gal Gadot gets to do a video of people singing Imagine in 50 different keys.
Right.
No
how
matter
many pots and pans we wash as well.
Yeah, exactly. No matter how many dishes we do, there's always going to be more fucking dishes, you know?
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that I've had to make my peace with is like, look, like you can be this hero martyr figure on the inside of your head and it's still not going to change the world. And you might be able to make some difference. You are able to make some difference. But if you keep being that person for your entire life, you're going to kill yourself in the process, right? I mean, maybe through suicide, but I mean, you look at activists like Erica Garner, right? Eric Garner's daughter, who died really young of heart issues. And there's no question in my mind that the strain of the work that she was doing and how much she was on fire for justice was a significant strain on her physical health.
Absolutely.
And so I think that like there is I think a necessary, if you want to be happy, if you think that enjoyment of your life and fulfillment and contentment are worthwhile goals to have, then you have to moderate how much you're trying to do to shift the world around you.
Yes, and there is if we kind of go within, when we are committing to doing sort of social justice work, presumably it's that commitment to contentment is there beneath it. There's the idea that people are not content. People ought to be content, and there ought to be conditions that allow people to be content. If we are not valuing contentment in ourselves, if that's not a piece, and then there's a kind of discrepancy there.
Totally. And I mean, the way I, as a person who was not taking care of myself and trying really hard to make the world a better place around me, the way I resolved that was just to say, well, it's other people's contentment and happiness that are important. Mine is irrelevant. Yeah, I mean, the other piece to that, though, that I think is complicated is that, like, when you have decided that your life doesn't matter, right, and that what matters is other people's lives, other people's happiness, other people's growth, and you adopt sort of that hero-martyr complex, right, you end up being more of an asshole to the people around you, right, because you're saying, I don't have needs, I don't have anything that I need, my life doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right, but in reality what you're doing is like continually allowing suffering in yourself, right? And of course that comes out as resentment. Of course that comes out as arrogance. Because you're giving and you're giving and you're giving and you don't feel like you're getting anything back. Now, I mean, actually what you're getting back is a shallow level of self-confidence that you're doing the right thing, right? And a sense of moral superiority.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah, but you don't feel like you're getting anything back, because you're setting aside purposefully your contentment, your happiness, and all of these things. So, it makes you a right asshole. what a lot of much, much, much wiser people were telling me during that period, you know, was true, that like you can't pour from an empty cup. Like you know, you have to find happiness and contentment and those kinds of things in your life to even stay alive, let alone do good work, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't understand it until I hit rock bottom, of having gone to the absolute youngmost end of the spectrum, right? And done all this work and being completely burned out and broken and hurt, and needing to find my center again.
Let's focus on all of those themes as they show up in the first half of the EP, in Walls and Memory Cards.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they certainly do, don't they? In Memory Cards, I just think it's so interesting that the journey that we go on involves literally pressing play and then later pressing pause. And I think that those two gestures certainly relate to the kind of more abstract conversation that we've been having.
Yeah.
And then in Walls, it, and therefore the EP, begins with reflecting back on the kind of oneself in hero, would-be hero, self-styled hero, martyr role. Used to dance around the problems that you made for us, used to see you struggle and start keeping up. That second line, used to see you struggle and start keeping up.
Yep.
Like, we're looking at the world through the lens of where are the problems for me to solve, who are the people in need of being saved, who are the villains, and then how do I show up as the hero in each of these instances.
Yeah.
This used to be the case. We're looking back at that, and then of course in the chorus with Eric Mason, fear.
God, he blew that out of the water.
Oh, absolutely.
I wrote that chorus, and I, recorded some versions of it and was like, this just doesn't sound as good as I want it to. Like, who would sound awesome on this is Eric, and I sent it to him, and he sent it back with all those incredible vocal harmonies, and I just, oh my God, I could not stop listening to it for a week.
Yeah, it is incredible.
Yeah, his vocal arrangement is so incredible. He's an amazing, amazing artist. He's one of my very favorites ever out of Minneapolis.
Yes, absolutely. One of mine too.
Yep.
So Brené Brown, talking about boundaries, she says some of the most empathetic people, what her research shows is that the most empathetic people are the most boundaried people. So to be aware and candid, forthright about what is and isn't okay. She says it's hard to be loving towards someone if we are being really hurt, if we're allowing ourselves to be hurt by them.
Yep.
Because for the exact same reasons you were highlighting, there's going to be resentment even if we don't allow ourselves to consciously own it.
Yeah.
It's going to be there. But if I'm very explicit and clear, this is okay, this is not okay, then I can simultaneously be aware of the conditions that might lead to the person behaving in that way, and I can acknowledge the suffering and be loving. But if I'm not being loving to myself and creating this container or controlling what I let in and out of my energetic realm.
Yeah, and Walls is about 3 or 4 different people in my life, right? I think this lesson that I kept learning, right, where I was in this very naive place where I thought I was in deep community with these people, and that we would work through anything together, right? And that we would put our whole selves on the line. And work through absolutely anything because that's how much we mattered to each other. And what I saw time and time again in these different situations was people running into their trauma points and stopping engaging, right? Either being, unwilling to be vulnerable about where they were at and what was going on with them so that we could work something out, or stepping away from a group of friends because they were hurt and they weren't willing to talk about it with people, or just shutting down and deciding that people, a person around them was horrible instead of trying to understand them, right?
Yes.
And luckily I grew up in like a really healthy households. And so it has never been hard for me to sit down and try to work things out with people. That's always been a very, very natural instinct for me. And so running into people who maybe had much harder experiences earlier in life and had more trauma responses, who, would retreat behind walls, right, and boundary themselves and refuse to engage in, sort of messy attempts at reconciliation.
Yeah, the walls instead of boundaries.
Was really jarring for me, and it still is hard for me. That built up a lot of resentment and a lot of anger for me towards those people for setting those up. But I think one of the things that I realized, in that process is that, like, I am soft. I mean, like, for all that, I fight and I organize and all of these things, I am a very, very soft boy. And I had to learn how to build those boundaries, because once I recognized that people weren't always going to be comfortable coming to the table to be in that space of vulnerability and reconciliation and forward momentum, I had to learn that, like, sometimes it's just fuck those people, and there's no way around that, There's no, you can't fix, I mean, again, it's the interior version of what we were talking about externally, right? Like, there are some relationships you can't fix, just like there are some problems in the world that you can't fix, as an individual anyway. I think when I started writing that song, I really resented but understood those people's decision to create those walls and avoid that vulnerability. I think now I really understand, having been through more shit myself, why people do that, and understand that I have to do that to some level to survive.
Absolutely.
But, like, it's not, that's not necessarily a realization that I'm happy about, right? Like, the end, right, is we were never meant to live this way, never meant to hold up all this strain, so we build up walls. We keep looking for a place to stay. Until then, we keep hoping it'll change, and we build up walls.
Yeah. So by this point, I was saying in the previous EP, there's this awareness of disconnection and a yearning for connection. Here, there seems to be an acceptance of the fact that we do continue to create these walls for disconnection, and you're not making us bad for doing so.
No, I mean, we're all just trying to survive.
Yes.
Right?
And we honor that, we value that. We're trying to survive, we're trying to flourish, and part of what happens in that story is the creation of these walls.
Yeah, and the creation of systems of control, right? I mean, like, why is fascism rising in the world right now, right? It's because people feel out of control.
Yeah.
And people retreat to authoritarian systems of ideology when they're scared.
We do, yeah.
And so we create these systems of control and disconnection at individual levels and at collective levels to try to keep ourselves safe. It's a complicated tension, right, of the ability to find the yin and the diplomacy and the relationship with each other and the love, and the necessity of finding the yang and the boundaries and the fighting spirit.
Yes, yeah. I love that in Walls and throughout the record, rather than kind of being in the story of I've been let down by people, I've been betrayed. The word betrayal comes up in Walls, but we're rather invited to wonder how many betrayals are you going to make. There's self-betrayal that happens when we allow ourselves to act in a way that doesn't align with who we most deeply are. And it takes a lot of commitment and intentionality, not just like the word love,
Yeah.
to develop and sustain the awareness of like, when am I falling out of alignment with that? And the question that the song that Walls asks, that I think kind of rings out beyond the record, is, what do you taste of your truth? That's such a powerful question. To close, could you just elaborate a bit more on that question and how that fits with the record as a whole?
Yeah. I mean, Mixed Feelings as a record, right, is about trying to process and live in the gray zones, right?
Yeah.
Feeling like you want to be weak, but you can't be, right? Like feeling like, other people are assholes for having boundaries that prevent them from connecting with people, but also maybe I need those too, right? I miss my ex, and also I feel a lot of resentment towards her, right? I keep washing these dishes, but they don't go anywhere, right? And like ultimately it's, about how we try to find meaning in these contradictions. I think we all have a lot of different truths, right, that we play with, right? I mean, maybe this is because I'm a Gemini, but like I can't help but notice that I hold multiple truths all the time, and that they're often in tension and conflict with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the best things that Taoism has given me is understanding that those tensions are natural and unavoidable, and that it is a paradox.
Yes.
And that there isn't one truth there.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, rather than thinking about truth as like, okay, so is truth, a beer or a glass of wine, right? Truth is a cocktail with, all kinds of different ingredients in there, and you don't necessarily know what's in there, and it might be sweet and it might be bitter, and it's such a complex flavor, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the questions, for all of us is, how do we develop a sophisticated palate for our own experiences, right?
Absolutely.
And start to pick out, okay, well, there's a note of bitterness here. There's a lot of anger here, right? But then there's this like soft undercurrent, sort of honey feeling to the whole thing that makes it go down easier. And I think that's ultimately what good art does, right? Is walks us away from emotional simplicity and easy narrative, right? And forces us to sort of contend with complexity.
Mm-hmm. And experience and savor the taste of it.
Yeah, human beings are not simple creatures. We have a lot going on. And life experience only makes us more complicated, I think, not less. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, I think, the more that we can learn about ourselves, the more that we can savor ourselves, and the more that we can live into ourselves, right, the better.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to taste in my truth.
Totally. I love it. There's a movement away from thinking, oh, hypocrite, contradictory hypocrite, to thinking, oh, how interesting.
Because anybody who's not a hypocrite in this world is an asshole. because in order to be comfortable with everything that's going on in the world, you have to be an asshole, because this world is a frequently horrific place, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that we can retreat from we can retreat from the horrificness of the world is ridiculous because we live in the world.
Yes.
And so we are engaging with it in one way or another no matter what we do. And the idea that we can just unilaterally fix it. I mean, like, as a culture, we can and should fix it. Like, that is, we should not allow slave labor to exist, period, right? And that does require some effort from all of us to put in the work, right? But, like, if Simon went out tomorrow and was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna end slave labor in the production of rare earth minerals.
Keep up.
Yeah, like, good luck, man. You know, like, I would send you money and support you wherever I could, and my guess is you would go crazy within 5 years.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So we have to figure out how to find that balance and live into those hypocrisies and tensions, because I think they're an unavoidable part of life.
Yes, yes, and collectively experience them and work through them instead of projecting the problem onto others. Yeah.
The Holden Caulfield solution. The problem is they're all phonies, right?
Right.
God, I hate Catcher in the Rye. but like.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yes, absolutely.
You know, but like, it is about, I think, trying to stop projecting, stop looking at the outside as the problem, and start recognizing that the outside world is a good and bad place, and we are all good and bad people.
Yeah.
And there is good and bad to reaching out into the world to try to shift it and shape it, and there's good and bad in retreating into yourself and trying to shape and shift your internal world.
Yes.
So no easy answers, mixed feelings.
Mixed feelings. Is mixed feelings the end of the story, or will there be more mixed something else?
I have a couple more I'm working on.
You do?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hopefully they take less than 4 years to put out this time, but hopefully we don't have a global pandemic on the scale we did.
Absolutely. Okay, well, to be continued then.
Yeah.
3 down, 2 to go. And Mixed Feelings is out now. You can, presumably viewers can access it on all kinds of platforms?
Yeah, on all kinds of platforms. TonyTheScribe.bandcamp.com is a direct link you can check out, but it's on Tidal and Apple Music and Spotify and all of your favorite dynamic streaming platforms.
Cool, and there's more to come. Definitely more conversation to come too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for joining me today, Tony. Thank you for joining us, viewers. We'll be back next week, next Thursday at 10 p.m. for more Back to the City music conversation. I'm Simon Calder. This is Tony the Scribe. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. You're welcome, Tony. Thank you.